I'm going to start recording this session as well, because there was at least one person that couldn't make it and wanted me to record for them. And yeah, so my name is Jordan Bobber. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of the Green Party. And thank you very much to our MLAs for making time to join us this evening for the Ask Me Forum. So I'm just going to remind you again about the specific portfolios that each of our 4 MLAs joining us today holds, which may kind of prompt some of the questions that you might have for them. So we've got Peter Bevan-Baker is obviously the leader of the opposition, but Peter, you're also the critic for Indigenous and intergovernmental affairs, and is there anything else in there that I'm missing? No, those two. Yeah. Okay. Hannah Bell is she's the House leader, but she's also the shadow critic for social development and housing, and also economic growth. Trish Altass is shadow critic for health and wellness and for fisheries and communities. And Michele Beaton is our critic for finance, as well as for agriculture and land. So the way we're going to work here, we've got an hour, and this is all about your questions. I'm going to start off by just asking each of the MLAs to speak very briefly about just something that was a highlight for them in the legislative sitting that just ended on Friday. We'll start maybe with you, Peter, since you are the leader.
Sure. Thanks, Jordan, and thank you for putting this together and also being our moderator / host. A lot of exciting things in this sitting. Looking at my portfolios, when it comes to Indigenous issues, one of the motions that we passed, I think there were 6 that were passed in the House this sitting. One of them was in support of treaty rights and Indigenous fishers exercising their right to a moderate livelihood fishery. And it's been a hot topic in this region, of course, and to receive unanimous support in the House from all members who were present, there were a couple who were not, but all members from all parties who were present voted in favor. That's a big thing. It's a powerful message to take forward for the Indigenous community and for those who want to be allies of the Indigenous community as we look at what reconciliation actually looks like in a practical sense, which is when the real hard work gets done. So for me, that was a highlight.
Great, thank you, Peter. Hannah, what was a highlight for you in the sitting?
Well, I'm going to cheat because I've got an extensive portfolio. I'm going to talk about, I would identify the report from the Special Committee on Poverty on the living wage, measures of poverty and the basic income guarantee. I'd also speak to the amount of conversation and pressure that we put on government about the housing file and action required on the housing file. And the other thing was to see support for feminine hygiene products in high schools, universities, and food banks from the government that came from a motion that we tabled a year ago. So yeah, a bit from each part of my portfolios.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Michele, what was big for you in the legislature? Oh, you're on mute there, Michele.
I think one of the big things for me was going into the legislature. So we saw the report on the investigation of the Brendel land sale up in Bedeck was complete. So, but we couldn't necessarily talk about it. However, there was still a lot of opportunity to talk about land use planning, especially, and you know, how important it is. So we did bring forward a motion that didn't pass, but just basically calling on more accountability and transparency in what's going on in our land use planning and ownership. So, and of course, all the other good things like the housing and mental health work that the caucus did was just really a highlight going, and just to be part of that. It was really great work this sitting.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, Trish Altass, what was important to you?
Thanks, Jordan, and hi, everyone. So echoing, what my colleagues have already said, absolutely. I think that being able to put forward the final report from the Special Committee on Poverty was just an incredible moment. It really was it showed the ability of what's possible when three parties really do get together. It wasn't. We worked hard for the final report. There was difficult conversations, and I was so impressed with how everybody came to the table, fully engaged, and I'm really pleased with that final report. And if anybody wants to ask questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that more, as I know Hannah is as well. Also, as the critic for health and wellness, obviously this is a very critical time for health with the COVID-19 crisis that we're in. But in the midst of that, we still have all of the other aspects of health. And it's really important as opposition that we are holding government to account to make sure that, the minister can walk and chew gum. He can't just, do the COVID and leave everything else aside. There's still a lot to be done. And we passed 3 motions related to the health portfolio that I'm really pleased with. I'll just speak briefly about the first one, which was related to an experience I had with a constituent. Some of you might have read about that, Lucy Markunis, who had difficulty accessing medication because she has a rare form of cancer. And though the medication she needed was on the formulary, she was told she couldn't access it. So we were able to work through that with Lucy and then put forward a motion that would start to address some of the systemic issues that are barriers for individuals in similar cases like Lucy. So that, it's about supporting constituents, supporting Islanders on an individual level when they come forward with challenging issues, and then looking at what are the systemic changes that need to happen to make sure that we address those for future people who need those supports. So that's, those are a couple of highlights.
Okay, thanks so much, Trish. And so we're going to open it up to your questions now. So what I'd ask you to do, if you're able to, is use the chat box to just let me know that you've got a question. That way we can kind of get you on a list. If you want, if you're more comfortable, you can also just type your question straight into the chat. And if you'd rather not speak them out loud, otherwise I'll call on you to come on and unmute yourself and speak. And I did receive some pre-submitted questions, actually, that we can get started with right away. And I know that that the folks that submitted them are here right now. So first of all, Jeannie Mackey, I know you had a few questions. Would you like to ask any of them right now, or would you like me to ask one of them for you?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Jordan?
we can. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I don't have the questions in front of me, so if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I can. Okay, you've got some good questions there, Jeannie. So so Jeannie's first question has to do with the forestry carbon capture program. She says it consists mainly of planting white spruce along with some white pine. That softwood plantation since at least the 1970s has led to the degradation of PEI's forests, but they continue to be planted. She says she won't go into details here to be brief, but would like to know what the Green Caucus envisions for how government can use forests more wisely for capturing carbon. For example, would you consider banning clear cutting under most circumstances? Does anybody want to take a stab at that one? I don't know, probably Michele, that probably falls most under your portfolio, if anything.
Well, and what I will say, forestry actually falls under Lynn.
Right.
So I can speak to it from, like, I guess, an agriculture perspective, because a lot of the clear cutting is happening from in that perspective, right? And unfortunately, Peter and I have talked about this quite a bit, that land tends to be marginal. So when you clear cut and use that land as part of agriculture, it's taking that non-arable land in, and for sure, I mean, even Ava, my daughter, she's 11, she'll tell me every time you cut down a tree, you should be planting 2. But it is about the type of tree that you plant. You should be planting native species, not non-native species, or species, especially like around coastal regions where they have great big root systems that can contribute to the erosion problem, especially around our waterways, for sure. So I wasn't prepared to answer this one, but I do think that there needs to be a fuller I guess, vision or strategy from the perspective of our forestry. And I know that the State of the Forest report is due out this year, and it hasn't been released yet. And that's something that we are eagerly waiting to see. Have we increased our forested land, or are we seeing a decrease? Because over the last 50 years, we did see an increase. And now when we look at, we don't have a lot of old growth forestry left. So it's about protecting those, but also ensuring that we plant more so that we can start again. So I don't know if that necessarily answers it completely, Jeannie, but I do think that that's a great one to bring up next week as well when Lynn's on the call, because that definitely falls under her portfolio.
Okay, thank you.
This Millington, if I could just throw in, may as well, I don't know how to make everybody see me. Not that you really want to do that. I think it's important to introduce into the discussion a definition of forest, because what the forestry department calls a forest is often a plantation. And I'm in a situation right now where I'm trying to follow the rules to prevent the plantation part of my woodlot from falling down and turning into an irremediable mess. That's a good word, irremediable.
Yeah.
Knock that one in. And I'm being shepherded in the direction of replanting with pine and spruce. And in order not to do that, I have to surrender my access to whatever incentives are on the table to harvest the way that I'm harvesting, which is with strip cuts. And I mean, there's no option. The forestry department doesn't seem to be able to, for a number of reasons, reforest with hardwoods, and a lot of it has to do with the natural imbalance in the ecosystem. There are no predators for rabbits and mice, so if you put a hardwood in, you're simply feeding the rodents, and I've had a lot of bitter experience with that. So it's a problem that goes deep, and I'm not blaming the forestry department for this fact. They're trying to work with the natural imbalance that they've inherited, but the fact is that when they talk about reforesting, they talk about replantationing. and they leave it up to the landowner to try to reforest. So that's my 2 cents worth on.
Thanks for that, Doug. And I just see there was a follow-up question from Amy here asking if there's any precedents for limiting clear cutting on private land, or if there'd be any appetite for government to create policy around that. And I guess the question is appetite for government and appetite for maybe the Green Caucus to support something like that. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that.
So I will say it is something that has been discussed because I personally have seen a lot of what I would say is clear cutting in order to clear for agricultural land, like I just mentioned. So there is definitely, I think, appetite to discuss it further and to develop our policy on it. At this point in time, my understanding is there's no requirement to even permit it. So, and then by the time that you realize that it is now arable land, it's only if it's been declared at the end of the year, right? That non-arable land is now arable. So I do see around all of the Lands Protection Act and reporting and that area, that it, I mean, that's why it concerns me, not just because it's forested land being taken out of a forested stand, but the fact that is it being reported properly? So there is appetite, Amy. It's just we haven't actually dived into that policy yet.
Okay, thank you. Lots of interest around around forestry here, and you were able to answer that quite well, Michele. So that's awesome. So I know Elizabeth Scholes, also you had a couple of questions, and you're on the call right now. Would you like to ask them yourself, or would you like me to parlay them through?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, actually, I'm afraid I'm not capable of managing two things on the
Okay.
same.
Okay, no worries. I will read that into you. So Elizabeth was referring to the Act to amend the Animal Health Act, which passed in the legislature. There were actually two bills that both, and one that was the Act to amend the Animal Welfare Act. These amendments duplicate existing trespass prohibitions and impose grossly excessive penalties for minor offenses, including imprisonment. During second reading debate, no MLA could provide any evidence supporting a need for these amendments or explain why they are reasonable. This kind of legislation, known as ag-gag, because its purpose is to shield unregulated animal agriculture businesses from public scrutiny and deter and penalize whistleblowers who find abuse, has already been found to be unconstitutional in the US and will be facing legal challenges in other provinces. During debate, the Minister of Agriculture and Land also stated that his department has committed to a comprehensive review of the Animal Health Act, including increased penalties. So Elizabeth had a couple of questions related to that. One, what is the opposition's understanding of these bills and these two bills, and why did it support them? I guess that might fall to you again, Michele.
Yeah. So I shared, so the knowledge of the bills is 120 would have been around protecting animals, commercial animals, from being exposed to substances that would harm them or be of a toxic substance. And then 124 was of the releasing of the animals. And so around this, so I mean, I'm familiar with the legislation, especially in Ontario, that where we've seen more egregious wording around it. And I know, Elizabeth, I don't know nearly as much as you do, and I will absolutely use that disclaimer first of all and foremost. And I know it was concerning to hear the minister say that he's looking at an overview of the Animal Welfare Act. And we've had discussions about that in the past of there are, I mean, even though there was changes to the legislation a couple or a few years ago, there's still improvements that need to be made. And so knowing that that piece of that probably larger piece of work would be coming forward, I recognize that there'll have to be a much more fulsome debate around that in the legislature, absolutely. And that when that time comes, I hope that I can ask for assistance around, you know, what is in that piece of legislation when the minister does bring it forward, because I think that that'll be a much larger debate on the floor.
Thank you. And that's kind of ties into her follow-up question, which is, what are the opposition's plans to ensure that any further proposals to introduce similar or related amendments will be thoroughly scrutinized and opposed if they are found to be unreasonable, disproportionate, unsupported, or potentially unconstitutional?
Yeah, go ahead, Peter, if you want to.
Sure, I'll just say something and you can jump in afterwards, Michele. A couple of things around this topic. These bills were not government bills. These were introduced by the third party, by the Liberal Party. And our office tries to do a really thorough job of analysis of all the bills that come to the floor. Of course, we're primarily concerned about our own bills, and we do an enormous amount of research and consultation and all of the things that one has to do to bring a draft piece of legislation to the floor of the House. It's not a simple process. We also pay a heck of a lot of attention to government bills because they are almost, particularly now in a majority situation, they are likely to pass. So we need to know what the implications of all of the bills from government that come forward. And there were 30-something bills that were passed in this session. 36, I think, and the vast majority of them were government bills, many of them just small housekeeping bills, but a couple of very large bills as well. These two bills did not receive the same level of scrutiny, and I will be absolutely frank with that, as the government bills did, and absolutely not as our own bills did. And we, the staff, the policy staff definitely looked at them, and Michele, this is her critic area, would have been the lead on these files. Not everybody in the caucus is briefed on every bill that comes forward. We're giving working knowledge, but one person will take the lead, and in this case it was Michele. I was aware that the ag-gag bills that exist in Ontario and in Alberta and elsewhere are different from Bill 120 and 124. And that's a preface to answer the question that you just asked me, Jordan, which is that Camille Labchuk and myself have been in correspondence since last week, I believe. We haven't got a meeting date set up yet, but we are going to meet and we are going to be briefed on what to look for should government come forward with a more comprehensive set of amendments or complete rewrite of the Animal Welfare Act, so that we do know what to look for, where the danger areas are, so that we can properly press back and propose amendments, or whatever we would do as the opposition. So I think this was a failure on our part. I'll be frank about that to a certain extent, although I don't believe these bills in any way carry the same sorts of consequences as the bills that were passed in Ontario. And I promise you that we will not, when I'm presuming if it comes forward, a more comprehensive review of either or both of those acts come forward that in any way mimic or resemble the ag-gag laws, which have caused all of the problems elsewhere, you can expect a very, very vigorous opposition on the floor when they come forward.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Peter.
I don't know if Michele wants to add anything to that.
No, as usual, Peter, you capture it much more eloquently. Yes.
Well, thank you for saying that, and I'm glad that that is the plan forward. I should also warn you, when you meet with Camille, I'll be part of that meeting. So hopefully we can all work together to be prepared for what might be coming down the pipe.
Yeah, I'm glad you're going to be there.
Okay, I've got a question in from Peter Rukavina. His question is, to date, the grassroots policy development core value of the party remains primarily aspirational. To what extent does lack of a policy engine in the party membership compromise your work as legislators? Anyone want to take that on?
I nominate either Trish or Hannah to kick off on that one.
I can kick off on that one to start. I think it's a really, really good question. And it's something that is one of those things where we're aware of it and then we get run over by the train of stuff. And then we go, oh, we're still aware of that. And now it's 6 months later. I think we've had some real growing pains as in terms of sort of this exponential rise from sort of 1 member to 2 members to 8 in 4 years. 3 elections in that time frame, but that's no excuse. And so one of the things that we're finding is as we bring forward legislation and more complex policy pieces, we're having to kind of continually rush around to make sure we consult appropriately, which is absolutely what you want to do when you're bringing something forward, but it's packing that in rather than it coming forward from the grassroots and stakeholders. We still need to do consultation, but it would be better if we, frankly, appropriate to our values, that things are coming up. we are also, though, really constricted by, as Peter mentioned, limited resources and also the political space. So sometimes there's a gap between what we know strategically, long term. There's a lot of irons in the fire, or pieces on the board, whatever metaphor you want, and that's been really, we found that from a caucus perspective, we found that really challenging to sort of layer that piece of what's going on in the big picture and the complexity of how legislation is developed. Give you an example, government's legislation is developed over a 24 to 36 month time frame. So we're aware of, or getting briefed on, or getting initial notification on legislation that may not be coming for 3 more years. And that really informs then what we're doing to some extent, because we know where the spaces are, either the gaps that need to be filled or things that we can't work on because somebody else has got it. We also run across the challenge of having to continually kind of explain to people that we're not government. We are doing extraordinary work bringing forward legislation, but that's actually not normal for an opposition party to be as actively active as we are. Saying all that, I think we have shown that we can aspire to be way more than anybody ever thought we were going to be. And I would really like to see us finding a way that we can match up those two stories. Here's stuff that we're having to work on from a legislative agenda, from a political agenda, and here's the stuff that we know really matters to the people who really matter, which are the islanders who look to us to be their voice. This is one of the ways we can do that, but there are lots of other ways too. But I think the critical piece is that legislators and policy development has to happen with give and take on both sides, because it has to be super flexible, because you wouldn't believe how different our day can look, or our week can look, or our month can look from what we thought it was going to be at the beginning to where it is at the end. This stuff moves really quickly. So that's a really long answer, but I hope that kind of fills in some of the things that are always on my mind of, why is this so hard? I don't know if you wanted to add to that, Peter.
Well, and I know I see
or Trish, yeah.
Trish, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
so I just, obviously, I really do want to echo the growing pains aspect that Hannah spoke of. I think, especially for those of us who were new coming into this role, there certainly was a steep learning curve, and we're continuing to learn. I am very excited, though, about what we can do moving forward in terms of the grassroots policy aspect and working with the party. And I know that Jordan and Susan and the provincial council have been working on different ways that we can approach this. And I know that our caucus is really excited about that collaboration as well. This made me just think of an experience that I had this sitting, though, that wasn't grassroots with the party, but did really mean a lot to me. The motion that I put forward on mental health and addictions was a collaborative effort. I worked with two of well-known activists in the areas of mental health, Courtney Crosby and Ellen Taylor. Before getting into politics, community engagement was actually something that I taught to community engaged learning at Mount Allison. And, for me, that was a very important aspect of the work that I did. So that experience working with Courtney and Ellen really reminded me the importance of taking the time to engage and have the grassroots, aspect and foundation to what we're doing, and knowing that we're going to be able to do that moving forward more effectively with the party, I think is something that I'm really excited about, and I look forward to how that's going to play out in the new year.
Thanks, Trish. I've got Peter wants to add something to that. And Michele, were you putting up your hand? Yeah, okay. And then Michele. And then I've got Maria Rodriguez, who's actually been chairing our Grassroots Policy Process Development Committee, who would like to say a few words as well. So Peter, over to you.
Right, I'll be very brief. I really appreciate what Hannah and Trish have just said, and I would echo everything that they just stated. One thing, and I know because COVID is a convenient excuse these days, but we should remember that we did have an AGM planned where this policy development was going to be a central part of that. And it got shelved, of course. It will come back later. I think this spring we're having a policy convention. So next spring, excuse me. So I think it wasn't through a lack of will or effort. It was, as Hannah said, things happen and things take over. Plus COVID swallowed that up and chewed it up. The other thing is that legislation, I always put legislation as the gold standard work that we do in the legislature. And in many ways it's the laws of the land, and that's big stuff. But it's sometimes difficult to reflect the concerns that you hear in the constituency, whether that constituency be the membership of the Green Party or the constituents that we all bump into every day. It's difficult to reflect that sometimes in legislation in the House. So it's very helpful to be able to bring forward motions like the ones that Trish just mentioned, and like a number of other motions that we brought forward that do truly reflect the issues that we're hearing from the grassroots of the party and from our own constituents, in whether that be in mental health or in housing or in water and air protection or in tourism or in, you know, all of those main issues that we spoke to at length. And those were the sort of main points that we tried to bring forward in this sitting. Not legislation, but definitely we used the legislature as a vehicle to make sure that the concerns we were hearing were talked about, even though it perhaps wasn't reflected in legislation. That's what I wanted to add.
Great, thanks, Peter. Over to you, Michele.
Thanks, Jordan. I'll just be brief as well. So something that I am excited about is within we've formed a EDA or an RA for Districts 5 and District 6. And as part of that, we've got a subcommittee structure, which, and I see Darlene's on, and Darlene is the chair of that subcommittee that we've formed for policy within Districts 5 and 6, right? And then push that up because obviously additional hands makes lighter work for all of us, plus more people on the ground that are hearing what's going on, especially in District 5 and 6. I might have specific issues in my district that, you know, Hannah might not be experiencing in hers, but it's still important to represent those voices. And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to through our newly created RA and a great executive as part of that organization. And also looking forward to, you know, from a provincial stance to get that rolling, because I think it's beneficial in so many ways because it just increases how many people we're hearing from.
Okay, thank you, Michele. And Maria, I know you wanted to speak briefly on this, and then we've got a couple other questions lined up.
Yeah, briefly, I think that already some of the interventions touched on that, especially Peter's. It's true what Peter Rucavina is saying, that this goal that somehow the policies come from the grassroots and how to channel that into the party and how to connect these policies with the work that happens in the legislature. It's true that these remain somewhat aspirational, and part of it is that the mechanisms to move forward or raise these policies to the a point where they can be voted by the whole membership of the party and where they can become the basis or the inspiration or something to align the work in the legislature for. This process is still a work in progress, and it's great that we have our MLAs and our here and our leader, because the shadow cabinet is actually responsible, or they are going to be putting or approving this process that they're being working to put in place to really have this mechanism for the grassroots to easily insert themselves into the policy making of the party. And it's true what Peter says, Peter Rucavina, that this so far it's a work in progress and it's aspirational, but I think that everybody has done a lot of hard work toward making it a reality.
Yeah, we're close. Thank you, Maria.
We're close.
So Phil Ferraro, I know you have a question that you'd like to ask about supported decision making to protect the rights of people with intellectual disabilities. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Yeah, I just wanted to raise an issue that has actually been sort of floating around the PEI legislature as far back as 2011. And that came about as a result of United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, in which people with intellectual disabilities should be recognized as being able to make their own decisions rather than having professionals make them for them. And actually, this was brought to the legislature under the GIZ government. And at one point, Jennifer Burgess, who works in the Department of Social Development and Housing, was seconded to work with a coalition of organizations to draft legislation. And it's still, there's still no legislation that's been drafted. And it seems to me like this would be an easy win for the Green Party to present. And something that I think Islanders from tip to tip would be supportive of. And basically, the idea is that the legislation should reflect the presumption of capacity rather than forcing people with intellectual disabilities to have to prove that they're capable, that there should be a presumption of capacity, of capability for them to make their own decisions. And I know, Peter, you've been involved with this to some degree. I'm wondering if the Green Party would entertain drafting that legislation and bringing it forward.
Thanks for that, Phil. Peter or anybody else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'll start. And again, I'll try and be brief. Phil is absolutely right. I have been involved in this right since the beginning when I got elected in 2015. I had two issues that I wanted to push forward in my first term in office. One was the Wellbeing Measurement Act, and the other was supported decision making. I met with Rosalind Walters. I have met with Rosalind, oh my gosh, and I'm not sure if she's still involved with the coalition. I would say half a dozen times during the first couple of years of my tenure as an MLA. We met with government representatives and the minister of the day, and with civil servants who were at that time drafting a piece of legislation. And each time I came back to Rosalind, whether it was after a month or 6 months or a year, and said, how are they doing with that? She always reassured me that government says it's coming next sitting, they're going to bring forward the legislation. So we didn't, and we had even more limited capacity back then than we do now. It was just Pat and myself. So we didn't go ahead and draft anything because we were assured that government was coming forward with it. That circle kept recurring, to my great frustration, and Rosalind's as well, to be fair. And she was the spokesperson for the group who I was liaising with. We have a new government now, of course, who, as Hannah just said, these bills don't suddenly appear after a week's work. This has been on the go for a long time. I'm not sure, Phil, that it's true it has not been drafted. Last time I spoke, I saw sort of a rough draft. I wouldn't call it a piece of legislation, but the outline of what it was going to look like. And it looked fairly comprehensive. I can't remember, I think it was based on Alberta's jurisdiction, if I remember right. So the bill is there. Government is, or it's, it could be there sitting on somebody's desk. It just requires it to get to the top of the pile in well, it would be social development and housing now, different department from where it was housed originally. But there's no reason why government cannot come forward with this. I will reopen, in fact, I just spoke or had an email conversation with somebody just yesterday on this very topic, Phil. So it's still a very live topic. Something I would dearly love to move forward. I have a personal attachment to this, and my wife works with somebody with an intellectual disability for whom this would be an enormously important piece of legislation. So it's something I'd love to see. We keep being fobbed off, if you like, by government telling us that it's there and it's coming, and it never has. But I haven't, to be fair, I have not poked at this government yet, but Hannah and I will get together after this, and I'm sure we're keeping notes here, and we will speak to the minister and find out where that sits on their list of priorities.
And I would just add, yeah, I mean, it's just to find out, is it on the agenda, and where on the agenda is it? And is there a way then we can accelerate that? And that's one of the things that we can do. Sometimes that's going to be more effective because government has way more resources available to them to develop legislation than we do. We have one person in the office and one person part-time in the Ledge Council. They have an entire team of people. So it can be powerful, like we did with the Youth Advocate Act or whistleblower legislation or conflict of interest legislation, that we can work in partnership with government, as long as that means that we have leverage to make sure that it is good legislation. So that would be the first thing to do, would be to find out, is it on the agenda, and if so, where is it? And if it is on the agenda, can we accelerate it? And then it's inserting ourselves into that process forcefully to make sure that we are at the table to make it the best possible legislation that it can be. But there are limits in what we can do, again, by being opposition. And I would argue us drafting this from scratch would be beyond our resources. To create this legislation ourselves from scratch, I'll be honest, I don't think we could do that. But we don't have the capacity to do large and complex legislation, and anything that looks at sort of crosses over into any judicial space generally is outside our resource base. That's what we've run across so far. Doesn't mean we can't do it. We just have to get really creative.
Okay, thanks so much, Peter and Hannah. And I see that Peter Rukavina had also just pasted, looks like a response from an email from October 2019 on this, that I'm taking it that engagement process did not begin in 2020, as so many things did not. So I see that there was a question here from Doug Millington as well about if we have any ideas on how to reach or motivate the shoppers he's witnessing every day who are so disengaged with the climate crisis that they idle their vehicles while they or a partner are shopping. Seems like an opportunity to get people to take at least a baby step towards acceptance of or engagement with the reality. And I saw that Peter had responded there that he's been looking at idling legislation. Did you want to say anything more about that, Peter?
Sure, I feel like I've spoken a lot tonight, but I'll be brief on this. I'd say about 2 years ago, I'm not sure if Hannah was elected at that point or not, certainly before the new caucus, the entire caucus we have now was around. We looked at idling legislation in other jurisdictions across Canada, provincial jurisdictions, and there were a couple of different ways of approaching it. And I remember, I want to say Ontario, but I could be wrong about that, had the most, it seemed like the most appropriate one for us to use in our jurisdictional scan, for us to use as a template for potential legislation here. And again, it just never, with our resources and time and all of the other things that come up, it never made it beyond that initial research phase. But that work is done, and it's in the archive somewhere in our office. So I will commit after this call that we will bring that back up, find out where the work was done, whether we can build on that, and whether this is a bill, because that's a fairly simple bill compared to supported decision making, for example. And that would fall within the capacity of our office, I think, to bring it forward. I always hesitate because nothing is ever simple, I've discovered, when it comes to presenting legislation. But my memory of the legislation that we were going to base it off is that it's a fairly simple, straightforward, and something that we would be able to do in our office. So I commit to looking at that again.
Great, thank you, Peter. I'm going to go to another one that Jeannie had submitted here. And remember, keep your questions coming. We still got 15 minutes, and we want to get as many questions answered as possible. Jeannie says that development on PEI is progressing at breakneck speed, with what appears to be little heed of the well-being of residents or the environment. Would it not be possible to make some changes that would solve problems rather than create new ones?
Yes.
Well, Trish is fisheries and communities, aren't you? So this might fall under your gambit, does it?
Possibly. I think it can also fall under land use as well, probably, which would be Michele's portfolio. And I know that that's something that we've spoken about a few times. And I know she's got some ideas. So Michele, did you want to share some of those now? Actually,
Sure, I can. Yeah. So first of all, I mean, when you look at it, 70% of our island land is unincorporated land, right? And we often see that urban spread of people building outside of municipalities because there's benefits to it. There is lower taxes, they've got more green space, there's less regulations, less bylaws. It's just simpler way of life for some people. And the land out there is easier to buy from agriculture and to then death by 1,000 cuts, splitting it up into subdivision lots. So I do have thoughts on it. And so 30% of it is, as she mentioned, under municipalities. And when they had the split of municipalities and land, because you'll recall that it used to be community and lands and they used to be joined together. And we're hearing, especially from the professional planners profession, experts, that has caused a lot of issues because within municipalities, they do have a very clear public engagement, public consultation process to go through whenever they are developing land. Now, albeit there may be some municipalities that do that better than others, which definitely they should be called out for that process if they're not following that, because there is very clear guidelines. But what happened when they split community and land, all those tools went with communities and none with land. And so as it stands right now, and I look at it as a complete stall, is that the Land Matters PEI committee has been set up to once again review land. And in 2014, we had the task force on land use planning that came forward with great recommendations. And it actually came through with policy measures that government would just have to implement. And that didn't happen because land use is not popular. People don't like to be told what they can and can't do with their land. But I did have a round of questioning on this with the minister because land use planning causes conflict with islanders. Any way you look at it, I mean, I've got one right now in Stratford where there is basically a pit in a residential area, and and they're taking crushed asphalt to it, but it's driving right through a very slow not a subdivision, but roadway that's causing issues. When there was another one where it was down in the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, there was a waste plant that they were talking about putting in Baldwin's Road. So when you have those very clear issues of how to use land, but there is no process of going through public consultation, we're going to run into issues. And we're seeing that up in Margaret's Bay. We saw them, St. Margaret's, we saw them plow through a sand dune because, a path that had been used for generations was no longer being used because the new landowner didn't want it used. But there's certain steps that has to happen with this. And unfortunately, it's not happening. And unfortunately for many governments prior to us, they have not addressed it. And what's required is an official plan. So our communities require an official plan. We saw that down with Three Rivers in a recent town council meeting, and now they're struggling with an official plan. But and sorry to step into your space, Trish, but when they don't have the resources to actually develop an official plan, and a lot of these newer developed communities through the Municipal Government Act, the amalgamated ones, they don't have the capacity to do it themselves, but they also don't have the money to go out and get it done. So it does cause issues, and it's going to cause issues. But what it comes down to is land use planning, and we need an official plan. I do feel strongly about that one.
We couldn't tell, so thanks for saying that at the end. Thanks, Michele. I see we've got a small question from Susan Hartley, president of the Green Party, by the way. She says she feels that we're being distracted and having our gaze drawn to bricks and mortar when it comes to mental health and away from population health, prevention, etc., such as upstream policy development. How can we get the focus on what will make a real difference in the long term and away from the medical model of mental health to the social determinants of health?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a big question for sure. I think, in the last sitting, we were debating the capital budget, right? So there really was a lot of focus, to be honest, on bricks and mortar, just because of the practical, reality of what we were debating. And some of that is, I just do want to highlight it is quite important, particularly when we're talking about the mental health hospital. I recently had the opportunity to tour Hillsborough Hospital, which is a facility that was built as an asylum, and it is, it's the staff there have done their very best to make that facility functional in the best way they can for patients. But it's quite stark to see the rooms without windows and the stark or the sharp corners that staff can't see around. So there's safety issues. So there is a bricks and mortar piece that does need to be addressed, and that hospital is not functional, it's not safe, and we need a new hospital, and we need to move on that now. That being said, though, the bigger picture, as you point out there, Susan, is what do we need to do? What are the pieces that are going to promote mental health and well-being? We can't always be looking at this as a what do we do all the way down the line when people are in crisis. We also need to be looking at what can we do to make sure people are able to live as healthy and well as they can, so that hopefully we can do everything we can to prevent people from getting to a stage of crisis in their mental health. And you're right, the social determinants of health, absolutely, of which poverty we know is one of the most important social determinants of health. For me, that was one of the why I think that the work of the Poverty Committee, the Special Committee on Poverty, was so important as a step to recognize that making sure that everybody has enough to live with basic health and dignity, no matter what, that will have a larger impact on our society, on our mental health and well-being. And you can't separate issues of poverty and income from mental health and health. You can't, they're interconnected. And if we really want to start addressing mental health, some of the root causes, we do need to address things like poverty. So when I think about what a basic income would do for the health and well-being of so many islanders, I just, I know that it's a big change. It's a big ask for people to shift the way that we think about society and the way that we think about each other. But poverty, it makes people sick. This is the reality. The stress and just the physical impacts of not having enough to eat, of not knowing, if you're going to be secure in your housing, they're just exponential. And if we can start addressing the social determinants of health, if we can do that upstream work, we will see the impacts down the road. And I couldn't agree more that we need to start thinking that way.
Great, thank you very much, Trish. Yeah, that's a big answer to a small question. Get it?
Can I add one quick thing there? Just one thing. I see Susan saying we don't need a big pilot, we need to just do it. And Hannah will probably agree with me here, I think was one of the things I was really happy about with this report, is that we did, the recommendation from the committee was a full basic income for Prince Edward Island. That the primary goal, and I can tell you everybody agreed to this, is we need our provincial government to advocate and work with the federal government for a full basic income for all of PEI. That's huge. That's a huge commitment there. And now we just need the government to act on it. And we've heard the Premier speak several times in support of a basic income, actually, just this past sitting. So I look forward to holding them to that.
Trish, can you tell me how they came to 85, how you came to 85% of the, instead of 100% of the market?
Yeah, no, thank you, Susan. That's a really good question. And I think if you're looking at the whole report, it isn't just about the 85%, right? We also did recommend that all other social programs, except for the actual social assistance benefits, would still be in place. When you looked at the actual impact, the cost implications of raising that, I'm not sure what that was in the background, but of going from the 85% to the 100%, there was a significant cost increase with actually quite a small impact on the actual percentage level of poverty in Prince Edward Island, particularly for key demographics like single parents. So We did look at those percentages. We looked at the cost, and again, it was a multi-party committee. So this was what was decided was the most reasonable approach for PEI as a foundational model. But I do also want to highlight that that recommendation also included that government would look at perhaps some modifications to that model, such as allowing islanders to earn up to a certain amount before the 50% reduction rate would kick in. So currently the base model is that for every money earned, you would get 50% would be reduced. So every dollar earned, 50 cents would be reduced from your basic income amount until it's reduced to zero, basically. There was a recommendation that the government could look at amendments to that model to expand it to perhaps allow for islanders to earn up to a certain amount before that rate kicks in. So it's a base model, it's a starting point, and it can be expanded from there. And just very quickly, we did say a minimum of the 85%. We would be perfectly happy with going above that. The report certainly doesn't preclude that from happening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted, Jordan.
Thank you. So I think we have time for to squeeze in just one more question. I'm gonna take another one from Jeannie. And Jeannie, you had a fourth question, which I think would be perfect for Monday when Steve Howard's going to be on, because it's about roads and he's the transportation critic. But Jeannie was asking if you have contact with PEI's MPs and senators regarding different issues, such as money being targeted for one area, such as roads, when it's needed more urgently for something like healthcare. When it comes to roads, can the money also be used for public transportation? With all the paving being done on roads that don't need to be paved, etc., it's a heavy environmental cost is arising. So it's money with strings attached. Anybody
I feel
wanna...
like we all want to jump in on this one, but
we all have stuff to say. Yeah.
I'll let someone else go.
So I'll go first, and I'll take the first part of the question about liaising with our federal partners. I actually spoke with Wayne Easter today, not on roads, I must say, but I spoke with him on a constituency issue, and I called Senator Brian Francis's office this afternoon and set up a meeting with him. So even today, I have had 2 interactions with my federal counterparts. I wouldn't say that's a typical day, but it's not unusual. Partly because I'm the leader of the party, so they would reach out to me to communicate with the provincial, with the official opposition here. But these were both advances that I made to them. So it happens frequently. I have really good relationships, and I'm sure this is true for the Resting Caucus as well, with our federal counterparts here, the 4 MPs, and also particularly actually with our senators. I meet with them frequently. I meet with them all at least once a year. This meeting with Brian, he happens to be a constituent of mine. He lives in Rocky Point. So we meet on a much more regular basis. I would say every 3 or 4 months, Brian and I get together. I'll leave the rest for everybody else.
I'll do a quick jump in, which is from a Charlottetown perspective. I actually send a lot of constituency issues to Sean Casey's office, if they're, especially because the programs that, if there's a query around CERB or around EI, immigration, disability tax credit, like those are all federally managed. Anything to do with it, anything's managed through those federal departments will have to go to him. And the immigration file, particularly in terms of sort of some economic development and social development, I get quite a few of those. So I liaise more with his staff. But I do try and arrange a sit down face to face with him at least once every 6 months. And it's really sort of, what have you got that's going on in your world? And this is what's going on in mine, so that we can kind of keep those channels open. Yeah, like it's we don't necessarily always, we don't agree on much, but we do coordinate and pass files back and forth and share information. On the second part, the really quick thing is, I think we're pretty clear how we feel about the paving over people, but the funds are not administered. There are funds that are available through the federal government that are earmarked for certain things. And so there are two things about that that matter. One of them is there are restrictions on some of the funds from federal dollars, especially matching funds, like 50-50 matching funds, or as we've had in COVID, 80-20, where you are limited in what you're allowed to do with that money. There were two different funds. One of them was the Build Canada Fund, which was a 50-50 fund, and that one requires projects to be shovel ready within a certain time frame. That means they have to be planned and scoped out, and you can have a pretty accurate price tag. You can't guess. You have to be able to say, here's the project, and this is what it's going to look like, and all the paperwork has to be in order. But that doesn't just have to be roads. The trouble is that the provincial government decides what it is they're going to put on their project list for shovel-ready projects. So the Hillsborough Hospital could have been shovel-ready. It was supposed to be from the day after the election. Housing projects could have been shovel-ready, new schools could have been shovel-ready, bridges could have been shovel-ready, windmills could have been shovel-ready, but actually the only thing that was shovel-ready were roads. There you go.
Wow.
That's the kind of the short version. I think, Michele, I'll chuck that football over to you.
I'll let Trish go first. She had her hand up, so I'll let Trish go first.
I can't
I'll
see
be
Trish.
super quick. That's okay. Just one more thing about roads. I would also add that it's not just about the roads, it's about which roads are getting paved. And I think there's a lot of questions about how that process works. My understanding is that there are road supervisors, and the ones I've worked with are fantastic, and they give a recommendation to the minister for each area of the island as to which roads should be repaired and which ones should be paved. And then the minister makes the final decision. So if you're someone who likes to watch, what happens with written questions, I submitted a written question on this to find out, to get any recommendations made by the road supervisors that have been sent in to the minister and the resulting decisions. So I want to take a look at that. So we'll see if we get that back. I was promised in the budget, the debate on the budget, that I would get that back. So stay tuned. We'll see.
Okay, thank you. And I know I said that was last question, but we've got.
Do you want me to take just a really quick shot at that?
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. Sure, Michele. Yeah.
So I'll just say I don't have many meetings with Lawrence, but of course we do send stuff down to his office all the time, and I do recognize I need to actually speak to him because I haven't done that yet. So formally I have not done that yet. Informally, I've seen him around a lot. And I have to say, I probably have the loveliest senator in Diane Griffin, and I see Diane quite frequently. I adore Diane Griffin anyway, and so we actually see each other quite a bit, and we've talked quite a bit. And so I think I am absolutely blessed because she's one of my constituents. So I adore her. I'm going to channel my dad for 1 second because my dad was a geologist. And so he would talk to me about roads all the time. I would sit around that's what we talked about at the dinner table. It was roads, because he was also director of highway safety, but he was also the planning department when they first initiated that in 1970. So when you want to talk about the roads and why the life cycle of our roads is so much less, it is because we build on sandstone. And when you look at other provinces, that's not what they build on. They have a very, very different substructure, which gives them the longevity in their roads compared to ours. You don't have to look much further than our cliffs and the erosion of our cliffs to understand what happens to our substructure. So that is roads. I would agree with Trish 100%. What kind of roads are we actually paving? Because should we be paving dirt roads where only a few people live on? That goes back to planning. Again, if you talk to a professional planner, they would tell you should define where people are going to live, and then that's where you bring the infrastructure in. If you're not defining that, then it's costing you a whole lot more money, because if you have 3 cottagers that live 2 kilometers down a road and you decide that you're going to pave it so that they can access it on the shoulder seasons, that's not beneficial to most other islanders. Rural internet's also a piece of that. You look at septic systems and environmental the environment impacts to that as well. Again, that to me comes down to planning, and if you're not doing good planning, then you're costing islanders a lot of money. And when it comes down to shovel-ready projects, I'll also channel my dad. He was in planning when they built all the schools in the 70s. I don't see any reason why you can't have a preliminary design of a school, and then you consult with the communities after that to bring in other things. I recognize the net zero brings in a different piece that they, that is different for them. But I also believe that there is a standard that we should go by, and that we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel every single time that we do something, because that's costly to Islanders. You're on mute, Jordan.
Thanks, Michelle. I know that we're past the hour. Maria just submitted a question that I think the answer to it might be short, but it's relevant, especially to you, Michelle, and I just wanted to squeeze that in there. So she's referencing the CBC investigative reporting, the big spend on how COVID federal and provincial government assistance money is being spent, and they're finding that there's very little information about how the recipients of these funds are using them. And they found an example of long-term care providers in Ontario that received these large federal and provincial transfers that were supposedly to improve patient care, and then ended up paying huge dividends to their shareholders instead, without visible improvement to their care. And so Maria is saying, thanks to you and the bill that you passed last sitting, the basically the follow the money bill, I think the nickname is. We now have the follow the dollar. Sorry, we now have the tools to audit how private companies spend government grants and contributions. And she was just curious whether if those tools are being used or have been used to verify any of the COVID programming money that has been spent so far.
So I will speak to the programs that the provincial government put on. There is currently, and it's over 18 months, an audit being completed through our Office of the Auditor General, and that came out of, actually Premier King had requested that audit. Now, the other side of it, though, is how the money is being spent. So you're talking about third parties, for instance, long-term care facilities paying out big dividends, and that's what they use the money for. That value for that follow the dollar legislation is the prudence of the Auditor General to either use it or not use it. There is triggers, though, for the Auditor General to do audits. That those triggers cannot come from the public. So if the people are aware, or if there's flags out there in which they think that public money is being misspent, the Office of the Auditor General's contact information is on the Legislative Assembly website, and I would highly encourage anybody that has a concern or has proof or has anything that they would want to forward off to that office. And if they see a reason to audit, it would be up to them to audit. We could request it as private members, but they don't have to audit what we request. They only have to audit what Executive Council requests them to do. Now, if we ask them, they would definitely see if they could do if they had the resources to do it. But they also listen to the public, because that's who they're there for, to be honest. It's an independent office that's serving Islanders.
That's great, Michelle. I wasn't actually aware that any Islander could sort of suggest things to the Auditor General, so that's really cool. Yeah. So I won't keep you any longer because we're at time. But thanks so much. I think you did a great job. And how does it feel to be in the hot seat, getting the questions asked to you for a change?
I can get used to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is, there's clearly a lot of appetite for all different kinds of questions. And so remember, we're going to have the other 4 MLAs who weren't on tonight in the hot seat on Monday. And we're hoping to do this on a more regular basis, just to, so that all these questions, you don't have to save them up for, a year. And gives a lot of ideas to our caucus as well.
Well, so we've got stuff to do from this. We've got actions to take, which is fantastic. So no, I think it's really exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
thank you.
Thank
I'm
you
so thrilled
much.
to see Jason. Hi, Jason.
Oh yes. Hi, Jason from Ontario. Okay.
Yeah. Hi. Didn't know you were there.
He was lurking.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and have a good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.